Serge, welcome to this edition of Founders Talk, Rally Founders Talk. As you know, our mission here is to help early stage or social entrepreneurs who are in the early stages of their work create sustainable ventures that also create positive social change. The other thing that we're really serious about is being a hub for social entrepreneurs, meaning that no matter where people are, if they're social entrepreneurs in the world, that they should take a stop through Orlando. And the reason why is because we have all the networks, the talent, all the things they would need in order to make their venture sustainable and create that positive social change. So you are an example of those resources and why people should come here to visit you. And so we want to welcome you to this Founders Talk. How you doing today, man?
I'm doing well, man. I'm doing well. Just reeling back after spending the weekend in Kansas City. So.
Oh, where were you in Kansas City?
We actually were at the Speedway. We were at the NASCAR event. Violet Defense and ecoSPEARS had a sponsored vehicle. So we got a chance to meet the driver and Ryan Newman, and got a chance to see the race from pit row. So really fun stuff. So
I thought you were going to say something like that you were creating a partnership with Patrick Mahomes and
go Bucks. Go Bucks.
Yeah, man. Well, look, Serge, the way we love to start these calls off is a question that you probably haven't been asked, and you can take your time to think about it. But what we're interested is in little Serge, right? Like, think about little Serge, whatever version you want to, whether it's the 5-year-old version of you or the 12-year-old version. But what we're interested in is what are the things, what did life look like at the time? And what were the things that cultivated you into like the person you are today? Like, the things parents said, their jobs, the environment, like talk about that for us.
Yeah, so, I'm an immigrant in this country, and I actually was born and raised in the Philippines. And my mom actually moved to New York, New Jersey area as a nurse to seek a better opportunity for her family back in the in the 70s. And eventually she petitioned me and my father to move to New York to start a better life, seek a better opportunity. But, I grew up in Bacolod City, Philippines, which is in the west side of the Negros Island and in the central part of the Philippines. And life there, it was an islander life, right? So, hold on, give me a second.
I guess the dog wants to join the talk too.
Yeah, so that's what the life of Zoom world and working from home sometimes. So, grew up in the Philippines, and I remember the fondest memory of what I had. Now my puppy's looking to play with plastic bags. Give me a second. All right, so I remember growing up in the Philippines, and I didn't know if I was going to be an engineer or in business or what have you. But I remember always like playing outdoors all the time, digging up clay like 3 foot deep into the dirt, and hanging out with my cousins and just being adventurous, making like these little cars that look like the Tesla models these days and making planes out of them. And getting to a lot of trouble at times, right? Going to the river and finding caves and just seeking adventure. So that was like I want to say like the oldest memory of what kind of shaped me today, where I could tie it in, because it's still that inventive spirit and that adventurous spirit that I usually take in these days to what I do in the business side.
Serge,
go ahead.
I was just going to say, how old were you when you guys came to the States?
I was 8 years old when we moved to New York. So that was back in '88. And we relocated, and that was a culture shock. Talk about island life, English was a second language. Barely, spoke English at that time, and just really, um, had to get accustomed to the the New York minute.
Did you grow up? I mean, in New York, was it New York City
Yeah, I grew up
or
in Queens.
in Queens? Oh,
Yeah.
were you friends with Nas?
Nas was Queensbridge, so
Oh, Queens,
we
that's
actually used to
different.
play flag football in Queensbridge quite a bit. And let's just say, growing up as a latch key and or latch kid key in New York, or you get to experience life to the fullest.
Yeah, I can imagine.
In the center of hip hop culture when hip hop was really starting to come about.
Yeah,
So
that's really dope.
Well, I
yeah.
was thinking, somebody asked me the other day about where people learn, like, I don't know, we learn so much about what's possible from watching our parents, even as kids. I don't think we even really realize it. And I was just thinking about 8-year-old, you're just old enough to realize what a challenge, how much hard work it is for your parents to emigrate like that. What a big task it would be to take on. And I feel like, I wonder if you were aware of like the choice that your parents made and how that hit you, and maybe what you did. Was there anything you internalized from watching them make the choice to move to New York City with all that challenges and potential and to take on that big risk?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it actually positions my parents in a different light, right? Because I didn't really appreciate the sacrifices they made for me and for later on for my sister until I was much older. So when I left New York, I mean, when I left the Philippines, I had a lot of resentment actually because I was a grandma's boy, right? And I was my mom basically lived in New York and she would come every year back to the Philippines. My dad, worked full time. So I was raised by my grandmother
Mm.
and my two aunts. So, I don't call them titas, I call them mama, right? Those were the parental figures that I had from 8 years old and younger, right? So when I moved to New York, it was more of a culture shock, right? It was a little bit more of a resentment kind of deal because I was being taken away from almost my nuclear family, right? And
Mm.
all the cousins that I considered brothers and sisters. So, but living in New York in that new world for me really, um my mom is hot. I mean, she's just fire, right? So you ask her what this means, she'll basically say, go look it up, right? I'll buy you encyclopedia sets, but I won't teach you. You have to do it for yourself,
Mm.
right? So that's what I learned. I mean, even like, I really admired Bob Ross and LeVar Burton growing up for those TV shows that kept me out of the streets.
Mm.
And I remember when I started doing oil painting when I was in fourth grade, you know, um, I wanted her to buy some oil painting set, and she basically said, "Well, work for it. Let's go paint the kitchen, and let's see what kind of allowance you can make from it." So it was always school of hard knocks, not only in the city but also in the household, and that's what really kind of shaped me.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's cool. Because I was thinking about, I mean, I don't want to jump the gun, Kyle, but I was just thinking about the scope of ecoSPEARS and that, like, that generation, that beginning story, and the idea of the size of the market that you wanted to go after and the potential scope of the product. Being willing to take that on has to come from somewhere. And it's interesting to hear like your mom forcing a sense of responsibility and like of your own capability down to the 8-year-old who had to paint the kitchen in order to get his paints. It's cool.
Yeah, well, entrepreneurship, there's two sets of it, the startup phase and then the growth phase, right? The startup phase is about the hustle and flow of everything. You got to figure it out. You got to be very dynamic, and you got to hustle, right? And then as you grow the business, it becomes grit and grind, right? And that's the aspect of it where, yeah, things get tough, right? You're going to get punched in the mouth in different ways from different whether it's clients or just failures, but you just gotta kind of stand up and keep going after it. And that's how you build a true business, because these days, in order for your business to succeed, you got to think globally these days. You can't just think Central Florida or you know, or the United States alone. Solve real world missions. That's it.
Sorry, I want to go back to the environment thing. Like, I think it's interesting when I peel back through going from Detroit to Washington, or right outside of Washington, D.C., one of the things that was available to me was all the museums that were in D.C. And it was accessible to me because I could just jump on the train in Vienna, drop down to D.C. My parents were fine with that. And I would spend all day like in these museums. And because of that, when I think back through it, I think to myself like, oh, that's the reason why like I became interested in like biology and specifically aerospace, because I've spent a lot of time in the aerospace museum down there. And that was like the coolest thing ever to me. And it shaped me. Like when you think back to your experience in New York, were there things that you saw that and experience that you feel like shaped you as a like your likes and as you as a business person today?
You know, like from what I do now, which is more on the technical side of things, the answer is really no. I was really kind of like a late bloomer when it came down to what I really wanted to do in life. So very similar to your experience in DC and the access to all those resources, right? We had those all over New York as well, and being able to take the subway. By the way, that's a key difference of a New Yorker to everybody else. They call it trains, we call it subways. We took the subway down to those resources and just really got a chance to see the Natural History Museum, Statue of Liberty, go up the World Trade Centers, go up the Empire State Empire State Building, and really got to see the different cultures. So if I want to say two things that taught me out of New York, or that I took away from New York, was one, the love for different cultures, because it's a melting pot like you would not believe, right? And the second thing is really what really shaped me in New York was art. So before finding engineering or aerospace engineering in college, I actually wanted to be an art major. I wanted to do fine arts. I was supposed to go to Fiorello LaGuardia for fine arts in high school, but got dragged down to Florida because my parents wanted a better life in Central Florida, because you know somebody was getting a little too much trouble in New York. So yeah, I got dragged down here. But you know, the cultural aspect now is the reason why I'm able to kind of almost code switch to different cultures in different parts of the world that we go to or that we serve. And then the art side of things, you know, everything that you do in business has to be pleasing, not to just the eye, but to make it an experience. And that's what I really took away from the art side that I learned from while in New York.
Yeah, that's pretty good. Your mother and my mother, although they grew up in different parts of the world, sound very similar. To my mother, I remember she would never give me the answers to stuff and tell me to go look up the definition in the encyclopedia or in the dictionary. And then they bought me some encyclopedias, and my thing was like I used to take them in my room and I would read one, all the A's, and read through everything. So up in this head, I got a bunch of like knowledge that's useless. But I'm always pretty good at Jeopardy. I always thought of like going on there and taking my chances. But no, I really like that, like the grit of there's some elements that I relate to you, like that parent that causes you, that you don't know it, but it causes you to like go search for stuff and be proactive in that, and to problem solve, and then like the trouble aspect, right? Like I was getting in trouble myself in Detroit, and that was one of the reasons why my father left Detroit and moved to DC, was because I was getting into too much trouble. And thankfully, that was a good place for me, the right next step because it exposed me to all these other things, which formed who I am today. So I see a lot of your story in there. I want to jump real quick to you somehow you end up in aerospace, and tell us how that happened, right? Like you end up in aerospace, and then how does aerospace tie into ecoSPEARS?
Yeah, man, God provides, right? So when we went down to Florida, another set of resentments, right? So I was being pulled away from everything that I knew from 8 to 15, right? Or 8 to 14. From what I used to hear, which was basically traffic and sirens and subways, to crickets in the middle of Point Siena, Florida. So if you guys don't know Point Siena, we moved from New York City, Queens, to the middle of the forest, right? Which is like 45 minutes away from anything. And the only thing that we got back then was a Winn-Dixie. Now Point Siena is really, really big. So, so when we moved down here, I found actually the education or the school system in Florida was relatively easy for me, because in New York, you would cycle through 8 subjects a day, right? And you didn't have time. You actually had to go home and do homework for the next 3 to 4 hours before you could do extracurricular stuff. But moving to Central Florida, they had these block class schedules where each class you'd only do 2 to 3 classes a day, Monday and Wednesday and Thursday and Friday, and it would switch. And then you have basically like 2.5 to 3 hours per subject. So I found myself like finishing up the classwork and the homework in class. And what I then learned was like, well, it was actually designed that way so that students can focus more on the extracurricular stuff, the sports side of things, right? Instead of like the education, because sports is very big here in Florida, not so much in New York, or at least in the inner city. So I found myself doing more sports than anything and didn't really focus on school. And when it was time to graduate, I literally applied to one school, UCF. That was the only one, just to get into a university. And I didn't get in. I actually had to go through the remedial program, which was the Pegasus program, which created a lot of opportunity for kids that I call late bloomers, that weren't as mature about their grades and their GPA, that allowed for us to survive and thrive, right? And that's part of the reason why I'm such a big, I have this big heart now for, don't show me your GPAs, show me your grit and grind. If you're telling me you have a lower GPA, but you're working part-time to make ends meet, that's character. That's something that I want part of my team. Don't just show me intellect, So it was literally just a blessing, that God provided, because I didn't really have a lot of choices at that point.
But then you mess around and you pick like one of the hardest subjects. Wait, did you study aerospace engineering? Like what was up with that?
So I've always had a passion for space, right? And I've always wanted to be in astronomy. And I'm like, well, that's a good thing, but I don't want to just study the stars. I want to build stuff, and my passion in art was still so ingrained in me that I found out that, engineering had CAD programs. That's when AutoCAD 12 was, starting to become very popular in the university. So I'm like, oh, cool. They get to draft and draw, even though I didn't take any drafting classes in high school. I saw an evolution really of computer aided design systems in this industry, and I wanted to be a part of it. And it's also, I had these really, really embarrassing pictures of netted shirts and short shorts in NASA. I don't know who dressed me at that time, but yeah, I'm gonna have to burn. I have this conflict of trying to burn it, but not really. But I had a passion for NASA as well. So I was like, aerospace engineering cool, let's pick that one. I didn't know how hard it was going to be.
Yeah. Yeah.
Serge, how long after undergraduate did you go into the MBA program? Kyle and I have a joke that the Venn diagram of MBA students and entrepreneurs, the overlap is not big. It's not a lot of times that you find an MBA person that also wants to start a company. So can you talk a little bit about the decision to go for an MBA and what you intended with that?
Yeah, so I graduated in 2003, and the economy was still reeling from the 9/11 attack. And I remember putting out resumes, and I was competing with 10-year and plus experience levels to entry-level jobs, right? So I was not able to find an engineering position probably for a good 8 months. So at that point in time, I continued my part-time job at Disney. And a friend of mine, you know, because I needed extra hours, he was a professional painter in Winter Park. And he's like, well, come out with me. I'll teach you the tricks of the trade. The best job I've ever had, by the way, because now I could cut and paint a whole house in one day. And I found out how much it costs to do something like that. And I'm like, whew, saving myself that money.
Yeah.
So, you know, where was I going with this one? Sorry.
After you,
okay.
When you decided to go for the MBA,
Oh,
like how
MBA.
you decided.
Yeah, so in 2004, I was working at Siemens Westinghouse. Back then, it was still Siemens Westinghouse. And I remember that I got kind of bored. You know, I did a lot of computer modeling and whatnot. And I was doing a part to a really large system. And I'm like, you know, there has to be so much more than this. And at that time, I actually saw, it was either an advertisement or something about the MBA program at Rollins. So I actually went to one of those sessions that they would, you know, they would talk about. And I remember one of our former deans speak, and I'm like, wow, I want to be able to control a room exactly like that at some point. That was in 2004. I didn't do my MBA until 2008. So, and part of that was just transitioning through different jobs and seeking other things. And until I later committed to doing my MBA initially as to be able to move up in the corporate ladder. Little did I know that it was about entrepreneurship that I really wanted to pursue after the fact.
And then that's where you ran into the ecoSPEARS, right?
So yeah, the ecoSPEARS, I was already working at NASA at the time, or you know, that time during the MBA program. It wasn't until 3 years later after I graduated that I came back and spoke with Carrie Coates and said, hey, here's my resume. I would love to be involved and pay it forward. This is why I'm passionate about speaking with the former, you know, our alums about paying it back to the school, because you'll gain so much more in return. So, you know, I spoke to Carrie Coates and said, hey, this is my resume. I would like to pay it forward some way or fashion. And she was reading through and she goes, you worked at NASA? Or I'm like, yeah, I'm still kind of there. And she's like, interestingly enough, we have this NASA Rollins Scholar Distinction Program that we're about to start. I'll introduce you to Dr. Pete McAllendon, and we'll see where that goes. And from that time on, you know, I was helping mentor Pete's teams. And in the third year, that's when the SPEARS technology came through the list of texts that we were reviewing. So that was
that is like one of the coolest MBA classes I've ever heard. Can you give the people on the call just a brief description of how that class works at Crummer?
Yeah, so it used to be just a semester of class. Now it's like part of the whole capstone program. So the class in itself is about the idea of marrying pre-commercialization, post-validated technologies from NASA and matching it with an MBA group of students at Rollins, right? And other universities are starting to do this also as part of the expansion. And the idea is to find a business opportunity and a commercialization path for those technologies so that entrepreneurs can start something out of it. And that's what we did with Spears.
So NASA has these patents that they developed for some internal use that they needed to solve, but there might be a commercial application to them. And so students get to just look through these patents and see if they can imagine a commercial application for these patents that NASA holds. And then they get an opportunity to try and start the company. I mean, I think it's like really a cool partnership and opportunity, but it is still rare, I think, that you find MBA students that that's what they want to do with their next steps. When you stumbled on it, how did you know, oh, this is what I want to put my eggs in this basket. This is the thing I want to do.
So,
because apparently you didn't see like a warp drive or a teletransport.
no, or a cloning device. No.
Yeah, so you hovered on this one. So to answer Ben's question, go ahead.
So in our third year, we saw the Spears technology. And so I knew the code discoverers to the technology. And honestly, I just wanted to grab a lunch and a beer with them, right? And so we selected it. We put a group of students, one team onto it that year. As part of like, trying to figure out the business the opportunities for it. But we were also working, the same team was also working on how to better expand the NASA Tech to You program. So the website that you see in the Tech to You, that was actually conceptualized by Rollins, students as part of that program. So in that first year, the 2014 or 2015 that we looked at it, we didn't really focus too much on the technology itself, the NASA technology. I actually had to go back to Jackie at NASA and kind of almost apologize to her and said, hey, I'm sorry we didn't get to focus too much on this, but I'd like to do it again, a second chance. But this time, I'm going to basically lead the team. I don't want them to focus on the technology nor the team building aspect. I only want to figure out what is the roadmap for funding and cost for this type of technology, so we could better basically follow the money, so we could better understand what the market looks like and how we create opportunities in that market and disrupt it. So part of, I want to say, the success of Spears or ecoSPEARS in general was really taking the leadership side of the team and getting them to focus more towards the marketing and the business side and the sales aspect of it, instead of the other parts that typically consumes their lives, which is trying to understand the tech, which a lot of them are non-tech students, and also team building. So getting them to just really drill down and focus at what they do best. And then having an outside leader basically that they have to answer to. So it becomes more than just an academic project, right? It becomes a real project. So
yeah. So the Spears, real quick, just so people, if I remember correctly, I don't know where I read this at, but the Spears originally were designed to pick up pollutants around the launch pad because there was these environmental concerns and the stuff that comes off, and the Spears were designed to remediate that. Is that correct?
Yeah. So the focus for Spears is to remove polychlorinated biphenyls, which are a regulated class of contaminants that's chlorinated. But there's also a slew of other chlorinated contamination. Focus has been PCBs because there's actually a regulation tied to it. So PCBs were invented in 1929 by Monsanto, and it was licensed in multiple different industries. So if you're talking about paints, caulking that would go around doors and window, transformer oils, they would all have PCB in them because PCB had a really good thermoelectric property that would allow for it to expand and contract at different temperatures, right? So they use it everywhere. At NASA, we had it in transformers, and we also had it in paint. Those shipyard gray or ship gray color that those buildings are painted out of. Those had PCBs in them, and the launch pad had PCBs in them because they needed a fire retardant paint. So the problem was, it would basically, when it rains, it would basically wash off the PCB on the surface level and get into the soil and eventually get into the sediments where it becomes bioavailable through a receptor, which are basically the benthic population or fish. And that's where really EPA hammers down, because the moment it becomes a pathway back to human consumption, they regulate it. So NASA already had a technology to destroy PCBs on contact, right? Chemical dehalogenation. The challenge was, if it's already in the sediments, how do we remove it from there so we could destroy it? That's what SPEARS is all about.
Gotcha. And the previous remedy was you dig it up and put it in plastic bags or something.
Yeah, so the remedies is to dig everything up, put them in trucks, and ship them to a landfill somewhere in Oklahoma, depending on
where there's fewer fish.
Huh?
But where there's fewer fish in Oklahoma.
Fish.
Yeah, well, there's you have to ship them to a specific landfill. So on the other contaminants that we're working on right now, which is dioxins, there's only one landfill with an incinerator that's actually operating to destroy dioxins. So that's in Texas. So our clients in Guam and Hawaii, and everywhere else in the 48 has to dig it up, ship it all the way to Texas. And sometimes they're paying north of $3,000 per ton. So it's a very, very expensive market. So much so that people have decided that it's cheaper to litigate than remediate, so they lawyer up. So that's part of this disruption, is if we can get both sides to come to the table, because now there's a technology on site that not can only remove it, but destroy it. I think both sides are going to come together.
So, yeah, that is just really, man, we can talk about this all day. This is fascinating to me. So originally the technology, so ecoSPEARS said, ultimately you end up starting a company with this guy named Ian, right? Mm-hmm. That guy. And that guy who you found in the classroom, right? He was a student, correct?
No. Ian and I were family friends. His wife is best friend with my sister-in-law. So we always used to see each other in family functions and family parties. Ian's an entrepreneur. He actually bootstrapped a frozen yogurt machine company here in Central Florida. And grew it. Huh?
Was it that Moochie place?
No. They made the back end machines for it.
Oh, okay.
And he was in transition at that time, and we just somehow ended up in the same DMV together. So you got to imagine there's plenty of time to talk there. And yes. I was looking at the SPEARS technology at that time. That was in 2017, and I wanted a non-technical co-founder. I needed somebody that can translate everything and help me build the business on the marketing and business development side. So,
Serge, one of the things that stuck out to me so much about ecoSPEARS is how long your sales cycle is, and how you've been able to keep momentum and investor interest while you pursue a long sales cycle. Do you have any kind of best practices or advice to folks who are in the early stages trying to get the flywheel of sales going, and like keeping that moving while also building investor interest?
Yeah, absolutely. So in the environmental remediation industry, the first thing people talk about are super funds, right? And Superfund sites are, federally regulated sites. They have multiple responsible parties, the ones that they consider the responsible parties for the pollutants. And it could be 5 to 10 years for those type of programs to actually happen, right? Even if you're a proven technology. So what we learned basically how to kind of slice up the approach and the business model and learn to make money in every single aspect of that, approach. So EPA, when you do an EPA project or EPA or state regulated project, it doesn't matter where it's a new technology or an old and proven technology. They'll want to do a treatability lab study first, then to a on-site pilot scale model to see the engineering scalability of it and see if it works on site with all the variables, and then go to the full scale. So in the first year of the company, it was about securing the tech, building the team, and building the brand, right? On the second year of the company, first to second year of the company, it was about being much more focused about being out there, developing the brand some more, and working with clients to open up the first tier, which is basically a treatability study. Because even if you give away freemium models, you're still not validating the market viability of your solution, whether it's tech or service, because you're just giving that shit away for free, right? So everybody wants stuff for free. So the freemium model is great. It's a great tool, because what we learned also in the environmental industry is that sometimes people don't want to do anything because, they know how much it's going to cost, right? For the full scale. So a good way for us was, and people didn't want to pay for the first tier, right? So we basically said, hey, we'll do this to you for free. It's technically not free. We're investing into it. It's typically a $50,000 to $100,000 program. We're doing this on our own to show you what our technology can do with your soil, or with your water, with your sediments, right? So that if it does work, you're probably going to be more inclined to go into an on-site pilot and try to help us figure out what the engineering scalability would be. Because we know on the full scale model, we could reduce the cost down to as much as 30% or more. So why would you not? And 20 to 30% in this industry is millions of dollars, right? And not only that, having, being proactive shows really a good position for them, not only to the state regulators or EPA, but it also bolsters their visibility to their community.
So you're saying you break up that long sales cycle into chunks and find ways to break the big sale into smaller little sales along the way.
Exactly.
Rather than giving those pieces away and only thinking you can charge for the end. But
absolutely.
then you also said picking some strategic people just to get the ball rolling to do that first part at your own cost instead of theirs in order to demonstrate its viability or something. Is that
Absolutely.
what you said?
Because even though you're investing to it and they're not paying for it, you're learning how to engage with somebody in that industry, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we did that with a really, really large pulp and paper company that every single bathroom that you could see their logo in, right? Mm-hmm. So we learned, and part of that, we learned that it's the most important thing that you got to learn, right? One is to say no and learn who not to work with right now. They may be good to work with later on, but as a startup with limited resources, manpower, and funding, you got to focus on who will actually work with you and build and be a true partner from the start that you could build a relationship and a future with. So that later on, the laggards will come in because they're much more comfortable at that point, right? Mm-hmm. So learn to define who your early adopters are and who your laggards are. There's a really good book that you guys should all read, which is Crossing the Chasm. And if you can't find yourself in any position of that, Yeah, just stop and don't do business. You're wasting your time at that point.
Yeah, you're wasting your time. I know the fellows are pining to answer you some questions, man. Let's go ahead and open it up to a few of these folks here. Does anybody want to ask a question? Open your mic up.
Yeah, I have. Oh, go ahead. All right,
Gordon or Josh?
Josh, you go ahead. I'll hop in after you.
All right, thank you, Gordon. Appreciate that. Good morning. My question was, because you said your company is an environmental cleaning company, do you work with cleaning the Brownsfield
Yeah, so
issues?
yeah, so there's over 432,000 brownfields in the country alone, right? There's a lot of them. And what I see in that is a lot of opportunity, because these brownfields, they're typically they're not in suburbia, right? They're inner city, and they're dilapidated, and they look terrible, and if you could actually revitalize that, if you could partner with the city and an investor and a buyer and the regulators to revitalize that, think about opening up and be able to increase the tax bracket on there, because now instead of a dilapidated building with broken windows, there's now a full thriving building with, my goodness, with a coffee shop, and I don't say Starbucks because I'm more of the other kind of fan these days, with eateries and whatnot, and where people would actually like to live, work, and play there, right? So we have not, as part of that whole aspect of learning who your clients are right now in this point in time, we have not focused on the brownfields yet, because it takes a lot of time to mature those type of programs to actual cleanup. So now in this next phase that we're about to embark on, and there's going to be a public announcement in a couple of weeks, we're going to be focusing quite a bit on brownfields, because there's a real estate play into it now, right? And brownfields could also be industrial sites that are, let's say, 40-acre pineapple agriculture sites in Hawaii, right? That could be another form of a brownfield that, that could be cleaned up and turned over for, housing.
Yeah. Monique or Gordon, I know Monique had a question about accelerators. You participate. Go ahead, Monique. You ask your own questions.
Thanks. So I just wanted to know, why you participated in multiple accelerators, like what that benefit is, and when do you stop accelerating, I guess, and start really getting to business?
Sure. So the strategy for multiple accelerators, and we've done a whole lot of them. We've done 2 now in Europe with Port Excel, and actually we had to back out of Port Excel recently because we're just too busy. And that's a good segue to an answer for you. But we did accelerators in Norway, in Netherlands, all the way to California. I think my team, Trevor and Colin, are wrapping up Sustainable Ocean in South Florida right now, and we're part of Launch Alaska now in the Northwest. So part of that is really branding and exposure. If you're looking to raise capital, that's a good way to get in front of relationships, not money, right? Think relationships first. And it's just really a good way to network and be involved and learn from your cohort, as well as learn from the mentors. But you got to be very strategic in how you approach accelerators, because at the end of the day, you have to be a little bit selfish into it. You got to get something out of it, right? So, but you also have to be really, really unselfish, and you have to really put a lot of time and effort into it. So it's really more about brand awareness and being exposed out there to the market as well as investors. And knowing when to kind of pause on that, I would say the moment you're into your Series A side of things, where you've raised your 5 million and now you're just focusing on growth, I would say that's a good time to pull back, because a lot of the accelerators will want to have an equity play into it, or want to have a percentage on sales on intros. That's actually a good way of doing it too. So at that point, equity is really precious. And at that point, I would hope that you would have formed a really nice board now, and mentors and advisors that you can actually leverage, instead of doing a 6 or 9 week program with an accelerator. Unless that accelerator offers up a unique opportunity. So like, even like a Series A type companies that haven't focused on social enterprise, I tell them all the time to talk to Kyle and Ben, because social enterprise is a unique approach into market, just like sustainability. So make it worth your while. And I think Gordon had a question too.
Yeah, Gordon.
Yes. Hey, thanks for joining us, Sergie. This is awesome. It's really cool to hear your story and to hear about ecoSPEARS. As you're talking, I was just kind of like browsing through your website and looking at the product and everything you guys are building. So I've got kind of two questions. One is on the product side, just because like I'm curious. And the other part is on the business model side. So first, with the product itself, so I see on your guys' website, you have, there's the spears themselves, and then it looks like there's like what looks like a milled aluminum disc that like all of the spears are in. And is that like a way to like press them into the ground, or like how does that like work? Because I see like you guys, it can go into different mediums like sediment and dirt, and it looks like water as well. So is it like these spears like get pushed down into the medium, and then they just kind of like sit there, not necessarily dormant, but they like sit there and like absorb?
Yeah.
Is that kind of how that works?
So we started off with the spears technology, which are basically the green spikes that you see, and they're filled, they're plastic filled with a reagent on the inside. What the reagent does is allow for absorption of the contaminants from pore water and from sediments to happen much, to happen a much longer time, right? Instead of being saturated, the plastic being saturated completely, it goes into the reagent inside so the plastic could absorb more. Throughout the year, so we focus on that. As initially, we attained the exclusive license from NASA. But we also did learn that the remediation schedule cycle with sediments, it's just overly long and takes a really collaborative effort from state and the RP. So instead, we basically said, all right, instead of maturing this technology faster than what the market would allow, let's focus on attaining pilot programs, on-site pilots, where we could deploy spears on site and have a surrogate lab study on that aspect of it, so that now we're in play in the Port of San Diego, or I'll actually be in DC in a few next month actually, to deploy spears there. We just deployed some in Sweden, and throughout talking to clients that had sediment issues, you would think that they would have upland issues also in soil and groundwater. And that's when we started developing other technology also to remove contaminants from dirt and water. All in all, because our play into the market is to develop a non-thermal destruction technology using photonics, UV.
Okay. Understood. So is the plastic container that the absorption material, or I guess chemical or agent is in, is that like a porous plastic, or does like the contaminants kind of like seep through the pores into like the absorbent material? Is that kind of how that works?
So everything in the world is pretty much porous. So the alcohol doesn't leak out of that plastic.
Mhm.
But what the alcohol does is it further opens up the plastic lattice so that
Okay.
it can actually absorb more. So
Gotcha.
it's a passive absorption technology.
Awesome, awesome. So and I swear this is gonna like flood into my business question. I'm just trying to like wrap my head around. This is so cool. So with like, so in the like the NASA example, or like at the launch facility, where you would have these PCBs kind of like running off the facility because of like rain and whatnot, would you have to like identify like how the water flows off of that region and kind of like plan where you put these spears based on kind of that like runoff, or do you guys just kind of do like a blanket coverage around the full facility in case it kind of runs off and all over the place?
So PCBs in particular, they do not like water. They're hydrophobic. So
Okay.
they like to bind themselves and get absorbed into organics. So typically PCBs are not mobile, right? Unless it's in nothing but groundwater and you just have, contaminants moving. So you pretty much look for hot spots where you
Okay.
would place those in, and the higher the concentration, the better, because you're getting a bigger bang for your buck at that time.
Gotcha. Okay. So it's not like a shotgun style like approach. It's like very like sniper style. Like let's find where the concentration is and then let's target those areas. Okay. So cool. So now that I have kind of a better understanding there, my whole question is like, what is your guys's like business model, and did you have to try like multiple different business models to figure out which one was like most easily digestible to your target clients, or like is it like a leasing structure where you guys are like putting these in place, or is it kind of like a service structure, or are you guys still playing with like the best models?
We are more, we're not a hard tech company where we're selling products. We're selling services that utilizes specifically our product. So if they want our service, they got to use us. And if they want to use our technology without us, they're just going to have to license it. So we're a service based model company. Although the market itself would peg a company like us to be just a vendor or a hard tech model. And that's part of basically learning to say no and pushing back and saying, no, it's not how we do things. So, and here's the reason why. So.
Awesome. Cool. So it's like very much like a service driven model. Like you guys will come in and I guess just like, regardless of the amount of infrastructure necessary or whatever it is, like you'll basically like do an assessment of an area and be like, for us to service this area, it's going to cost this much. And then it's just like just blatantly just like a service model.
That's correct. Kyle,
gotcha. Cool.
Yeah, no, I was just trying to, looking at the time here, and just trying to honor everybody's time and yours. First of all, this is good, man. I appreciate having this opportunity here. I'm glad that your mother decided not to coddle your attachment to places and people and to move you from the Philippines to the boogie down. Well, no, that's the wrong place. To Queens.
That's the wrong one, man. It's a Queens
I'm glad you decided not to become a hip hop artist or the next or Bob Ross. I'm glad you decided to come to Florida and live where you lived, and I'm glad that you ended up here. So it's been a cool journey, man, and I think that your journey is an example of why people should journey here to Orlando. Absolutely. So I appreciate you, bro. Keep up the good work.
Thank you.